Welcome to the podcast today on tackling the gender pay gap and hints and tips around the wider D&I agenda. I'm Danielle Goodrick, Knowledge Product Manager at CIPS, and joining me today we have Scott Dance, Director of Hayes Procurement and Supply Chain, and Yvonne Smyth, who's the Hayes Group Head of EDI and Director of Human Resources. Hi Scott and Yvonne, how are you today?
Hi Danielle, good thanks, how are you?
Great, thank you to have you both here and doing this podcast together and confront some of the D&I issues. So today I'd like to take a deeper look into the gender pay gaps we identified in the 2020 CIPS Hayes Salary Guide and get some practical insights and tips from you both on what can be done to try and address this gap. However, gender is only one characteristic, so I'd also like us to discuss EDI in a wider context. And Scott and Yvonne, hopefully you can share your advice to support our members' D&I journey, including what good looks like and perhaps some practical tips for D&I in wider hiring practices. So Scott and Yvonne, that's great. So Scott and Yvonne, we've identified a gender pay gap now for a number of years throughout our CIPS Hayes Salary Guide that we produce annually. So how have you seen things change over the years?
Yeah, so I guess if I take this question, I guess CIPS Salary Guide 2020 again monitored the gender pay gap across procurement, and I found that across the advanced professional level, the gap has actually narrowed by 2% in the last year, which is again a positive sign. Although the 2% is fairly small, it still is progress given that we noted that in 2019 the gap actually widened. I guess then if we kind of differentiate and look and more of a drill down between private and public sector, we've seen that this has obviously improved as well, with the public sector reducing by 10% from 2019, and then the private sector 9% less. So again, positive steps, but still needs room for improvement, I guess.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for talking about those. So obviously the gender pay gap reporting was introduced in the UK in 2017, I think it was. So have we seen much of an impact since it was introduced?
I guess it's certainly had an impact given some of the statistics that I spoke about previously, but there still is a large pay discrepancies between males and females, which obviously needs to be fixed. It's obviously good that there's an actual reporting system on this now, but yet again, it still needs to be looked at, because as the gap is closing with everything that's going on at the moment, it could easily quickly widen. So again, organisations from the senior level all the way down to regional management level and below that need to kind of keep monitoring where we are in terms of pay gaps in order for this to stay on the agenda and keep closing the gap. Yvonne, have you got anything to add on that?
Yes, I'll pick up the baton now. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been running a salary guide for years at Hayes, and I know this relationship between CIPS and Hayes has been, very long-standing, and we're all learning as we go along. And I think with the wider D&I agenda, the importance of capturing data and then actually, importantly, interrogating it and really understanding what does that story tell you is really important. And I think whether it's an organisation like ourselves capturing data, whether it is an employer capturing data on their own business, their own organisation, or indeed the work of CIPS in partnership with us, the capture of it is essential. The interrogation is really essential. And with the gender pay gap reporting, which is the first formal piece of reporting we've had here in the UK, it seemed to be very effective because it's been requiring the capture of the data, interrogating it, reporting on it, having accountability on it, and then having a requirement to progress year on year. So has it had an impact? Yes, it certainly has. Has it solved the issue? No, not yet, but we are on the journey. And the gender pay gap reporting is an interesting first look and pilot, if you like, at that whole world of data and inspection and what do we do and year on year progression.
Thanks, Yvonne. And you talked about data there and highlighting where the biggest pay gaps are. We see that at senior levels consistently year on year in the CIPS Hayes Salary Guide. So why do you think this is at this most senior level?
I think that, organisations, as opposed to just a procurement thing, I think organisations need to take a holistic look at their senior management teams to really identify how they can all address this pay gap rather than one specific function.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the 2020 CIPS salary guide, we saw that there was a 33% disparity between male and female pay at the advanced professional level,
Mm-hmm.
which again needs addressing. I think that what needs to happen is that, and I think that the good thing is that we've got pretty specific stats now on a certain level within a certain function, as opposed to other areas and other functions that may not have this detailed data. So I think it's making sure that throughout the whole of someone's career, from when they begin their career, maybe as a procurement analyst, for example, and as they work their way up to being a senior manager and a CPO, that there's continued progress in terms of what your next move looks like,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to getting to a certain level and then stopping those conversations. I think that also in terms of when females get towards the advanced professional levels and when they may look to take maternity leave, for example, it's then really continuing that dialogue as what will your job look like when you come back. And it's not forgetting those people that are taking perhaps a year out of their career and forgetting about them. It's actually really having continued dialogue to what your job looks like when you come back and how we continue to advance your career when you return to work. And I think that is a one-step change that I would like to see more across all sectors.
Yeah, I'll add to that if I may. I think, I mean, it is not, you know, this profession is not unique in seeing the much lighter representation of women at senior levels and accompanying pay gaps. I think it's interesting because, you know, within procurement, we see that the largest gap is within the private sector, and then we have charities, it narrows to 18%, and then we move to the public sector at 10% in terms of that pay gap at the advanced professional level. And that is really to do with the life and career experience of women in the workplace. And you have largely kind of parity when you come in, but incrementally, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, when we look at ways in which you can address the pay gap and kind of improve and narrow it. But basically, it's an incremental point that keeps on featuring, you know, as women progress through their careers, and a lot of it still is largely around caring responsibilities, whether it's for children or for older relatives.
Thank you, Yvonne, for sharing that. And you talked there about, obviously, this isn't unique to procurement, but what do you think are the main challenges in addressing these gaps and why?
Scott, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I'll pick that up. I guess that the good thing for procurement and compared to, I guess, other industries and other sectors is that there are a large proportion of females within the industry and within the sector. So the first part is keeping them interested. But again, we've got a really good base pool and a really good start. And I think, Danielle, to your point around kind of CIPS, I think if you looked at the membership breakdown, it's pretty much even between male.
Yes, it is.
From a membership point of view.
Yeah, it is. We're almost 50-50, yeah.
Yeah, so we're actually starting in a really good place compared to other sectors that would be like the heavy industries that would probably be more male dominated. So I think that what organizations need to do and kind of responsibly around what I said earlier around kind of having a real detailed career path for females and making sure that, you know, there's constant dialogue around what the next role looks like or what career progression looks like from also a training point of view as well, and making sure that, I guess, like all procurement professionals, is not just sticking to one element of procurement, for example, and actually diversifying your experience across all different sectors and categories, as well as kind of contract management and legal, ethical supply chains, and making sure that there's a whole breadth of different ways a female can progress their career.
Yeah, and I would also say, I think just with the pay gap reporting, remember that every time pay gaps are published, they're always accompanied by a narrative. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to read the narrative to see what other work is going on behind the scenes within an organization to really mitigate and narrow that pay gap. So there's quite a lot of other stuff that does go on. And of course, you know, the pay gap that is published is a point in time. And the programs and the support and the work and the opportunities that Scott is talking about, they are constantly evolving. And year on year, they are improving. One point I'd very quickly make on pay is that what we very often see as recruiting experts is a discussion, particularly when we talk to female candidates, and whether or not it's relevant to them at that point in time, around the wider package of benefits. So pay is one thing, but other benefits, for example, such as maternity pay and rights, that will feature, and why a woman may or may not take a role, or indeed, look to kind of progress in their careers. So pay is one thing, the wider package is a bigger consideration, financial as well as non-financial, things like flexible working.
I think, just to add on to that as well, I think that obviously we've seen, as Yvonne pointed out earlier, a kind of a closing of a gap within charity and public sector. So because there's such a disparity in the private sector, I think there's some lessons learned to be done there. So where you've got your kind of heads of procurement could potentially join up with some of those heads of procurement in the public sector and see what they've done as a collective, because that actually may help drive the closure in the pay gap within the private sector, because clearly they're doing something right.
Yeah, and perhaps there's some shared learnings there, like you say. So yeah, interesting. For those organisations who perhaps put more of a focus in their job adverts as well on flexible working, may attract a more diverse amount of talent. So just to finish this section then, what practical tips can you give organisations who are looking to address their gender pay gap?
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. So I mean, we've alluded to some of these already. I think the benchmarking of a peer group of similar organisations, and what are they doing and what can you learn from them, is really important. I think one of the key things is ensuring that you are really seen as an employer that champions the careers of women, that the careers of not just women, but anyone who's an underrepresented group their voices and their opinions are heard, celebrated and acted upon. So quite a lot of kind of public communication around that. Capturing of the data, understanding what that's telling you about the lived experience of your people, and just ensuring that you are regularly checking in with audits, pulse surveys, just to see how particularly in this context, your female population are finding their lived experience as an employee within your organisation. Absolutely essential.
Thanks, Yvonne. So if we take a look now at the wider equality, diversity and inclusion from a wider context then, what advice do you have for organisations who are perhaps starting on their journey? Obviously, not everybody has this right yet, so what advice can you give?
Okay, so I'm going to pick this one up. It's an area I'm very passionate about. First of all, ED&I is not a thing that happens on the side. It should be considered, and this is me being slightly preachy about it, but it's really important. If you get ED&I right, the benefits to your organisation, both at an organisation and individual level, are so significant that it should be seen as a really important business driver. It should be treated as such. So the starting point is any other improvement program, continuous improvement program, transformation program, you need to apply the same level of respect and focus in your ED&I program as you would something else, for example, an IT rollout. So starting point would be trying to identify what is the business benefit to us of having a more diverse workforce and inclusive workplace. You need to be able to answer that question commercially. You have to have a red hot commercial answer as to why are we actually doing this. Second thing is to get executive leadership buy-in, because if you don't have that level of inspection and accountability and an authentic level of inspection and accountability, this is not going to grow wings and fly. Third element, very important to have measures in place that allow you to demonstrate your progress, particularly internally. And if you want to, for example, things like the gender pay gap, clearly there's some external reporting that's required as well. So measures in place, very important. Fourth area, focus. You cannot do everything. The issue about ED&I is once you turn over a stone, there are 5 other stones under every single one, so it multiplies. and it's very easy to get goal diffusion. So very important to do some things extremely well, and you'll get a benefit from that. Linked to that, it's probably starting with the areas that are easier wins, easier successes for you. And at the moment, one of those things would be, particularly, we're in a kind of transition of coming out of COVID and the return back to work, would be, for example, the implementation of flexible working, and to maintain that more widely, a hybrid working pattern. It is one of the silver bullets. Was seen as being very hard to do by some organisations. They've had to embrace it. Let's continue with that. So it's really looking at each stage of your talent attraction, if you like, and importantly, the career management and support of your people, and seeing, where there are gaps and what small nudges can you put in place to make sure that everyone continues, in a positive direction, and everyone can achieve their full potential. So that's where those are the areas I would start.
Great, thank you. And you touched on obviously some of the benefits there, but that will be different for different organisations. So can you share some of the benefits of kind of organisations with a more diverse culture?
Absolutely. So the benefits are both, as I said, at an individual and an organisational level. So at an individual level, you'll tend to get greater collaboration, loyalty, tenure, the courage to, and the confidence to come up with ideas and different ways of looking at things. So you really kind of get the benefit of what that diversity, and by diversity we just mean difference, and what the difference is. It's a really valuable insight and business advantage. So that's at the individual level, and you can multiply that. You might have a workforce of 10, you might have a workforce of 1,000. So that really is a significant lever. At an organisational level then, if this is captured right and channeled and acted upon where appropriate, you will get better customer orientation, you will future-proof your business, your message to market to attract hard to find talented people will be better, your retention will be better, and discretionary effort linked to productivity again will improve. So the benefits are multiple and fairly well documented, but you need to understand, if you like, where your starting point is and where those benefits can be really harnessed to your advantage as an organization.
I think, Yvonne, just to add on to that as well, that when we're speaking to people that are looking for new roles, one of the questions that they ask us is, how diverse are the employer that you're going to put me forward to? They will start looking at Glassdoor, for example, to see if there's anything on there that's untoward. But they also may now look at diversity inclusion policies or what you have on your intranet. So actually not having that a kind of a robust policy or a direction of travel actually may hinder you in seeing potential candidates in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a risk if you don't talk about this. And I guess my note of assurance around this and reassurance is that you do not have to have everything in place and everything completely perfect. It is sufficient to show that you are committed and you're on a journey. No one has it right. But if you are silent, either because you feel that what you are doing perhaps isn't important and significant enough, or you're worried about people criticizing you because, again, you're on the journey, that is a greater risk. The silence is a greater risk than actually talking about what your commitments are and the opportunities that you see for your existing people and workforce, and also why you want to invite others to come along and be part of that journey. That's a very attractive message from a talent attraction perspective.
Thank you both. And we see obviously in the CIPS salary guide that the demand for good talent is really high in terms of attracting the right talent. So could you give some practical steps organisations can take to ensure diverse and inclusive hiring practices?
Yeah, again, I'll pick this one up. I mean, Scott sees it a lot as well. So the key thing is to be quite granular in your approach. And it's probably in some cases an evolution of approach as opposed to a completely rewrite it all. And we have an inclusive recruitment guide that we share with clients, and Scott and I are happy to take inquiries on it. But basically, we do break down the recruitment process into 8 stages, and it's applying a nudge and a tweak at each of those stages to ensure that particularly the impact of human touch and bias doesn't unwittingly narrow a pool of potential talent at whatever stage. And those stages are, it's the pre-planning. It's what's your data telling you, and the awareness of answering that question, why are we actually doing this in the first place? It's looking at job and person design. It's looking at how you craft adverts and put them out onto various job boards, where you post them. The candidate attraction, again, how do you reach underrepresented groups in an inclusive way, particularly? Shortlisting, interviewing, debriefing, having a critical friend, looking at why are you actually making that appointment before you make the final appointment and selection, and then the lived experience on the onboarding. And there are various nudges that you can put into each of those stages to make sure that the pipe stays as wide as possible. One of those, just very quickly, from a talent attraction perspective, given we've spoken about it, is offering flexible working at point of hire. That will open up a talent pool for lots of people who either need to or want to work flexibly. Another area would be having a consistent selection process and interview process, and making sure that there is a diverse range of eyes on an interview panel. And by that could be the optics, it could be age, it could be gender, it could be race and ethnicity, but also remember, you've got personality types, people from different functions. So it's just making sure that you have a diversity of opinion and perspective when those judgment calls are being made.
I think also, Yvonne, talking, that's kind of more on the attracting talent, but retaining as well. So whilst if you go through the journey and go through those steps along the way in terms of attracting, you've then got to make sure that from a retention point of view that you actually stick to what you said you're going to do throughout that, and making sure that you're including everybody in the journey. And as Yvonne said earlier, that you're not going to be completely amazing to start with if you haven't really started your journey just yet in terms of what it might look like. Nobody's perfect, but it's actually making sure that there's progression, and actually you are highlighting that progression with your employees, so they then feel that actually what you said from an interview point of view and the recruitment process, you're actually following through with that, because that may then lead to people leaving your organization.
Absolutely. And just to Scott's point, the lived experience and that it's not just at the recruiting, it is at the career progression. And really the principles and those nudges I referenced were at any point of human selection. And that does come to things like work allocation, it comes to promotion, it comes to opportunity. So it's just making sure that you keep it as wide as possible, to have the widest possible pool to choose from, and then you select on merit at the end of the day.
Thank you. We've talked obviously that this is a journey for some, and some might be doing some things, some might be doing nothing yet, maybe too scared. But if we look at the other end of the spectrum then, on what good looks like, from organisations who are maybe further on in their journey, can you share some insights there?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. There are certain organisations that would appear to be diversity champions and have kind of champion type status, and they tend to be quite visible, which is brilliant because you can learn from them. But every organisation is different, both in terms of its sector, where it has underrepresentation, size of headcount, etc. So I think the few things I would say around this is, what does good look like? D&I is embedded as a business driver and business improver. Continuous improvement, so no one's ever finished. There is continuous improvement in fast changing environments, particularly the ones we're in at the moment. Concept of allies, so it's very important that leadership and everyone feels they have a role to play. You do not have to be part of an underrepresented group in order to have a voice and an opinion, and to be able to champion the wider cause. So concept of allies is a really regular feature. Mentoring is a regular feature in well established and kind of well supported programs. The understanding that ED&I really closely relates to culture and an inclusive culture, so that's a theme that we see quite a lot. And again, it's just these very positive words around inclusion, celebration, flourishing, opportunity, respect, So all of those words do link to a culture. And so I guess to kind of finish on that point, when we talk about ED&I or D&I or I&D, there is now an add-on, which is culture. So you have culture, inclusion and diversity. That's where most mature organizations who've been at this for some time, this is how they kind of brand their programs.
Interesting, thank you. And obviously we've been through difficult times recently with COVID. Do you think that shaped organisations' ED&I agenda at all, or had much impact?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that some would say in the rush for survival and this kind of incredible pivot that so many organisations did, and it was crisis and crisis management, unprecedented times, etc. Actually, what happened was organisations that were looking after their people, who were trying to do the right thing, trying to navigate their way through these unprecedented times, unwittingly, they were applying D&I principles. So whether it was, inclusion and communication, and we had 66 million versions of lockdown, everyone was experiencing this in a different way. And being able to cover that all off and making sure that you kept your people with you was basically a really clear manifestation at scale of D&I, even though possibly with some organisations it wasn't being called D&I, it was being called survival. And as I say, doing the right thing. So that was in the early days, and it was almost kind of hidden in plain sight because it was happening. It was just inherent in the thread in terms of what we were all doing, both from a leadership down to the team and peers, and then upwards as well. Clearly, then there was a very sharp focus in May, which was Black Lives Matter and that global movement that came off the back of that. And that very firmly put a very specific part of D&I, which is ethnicity, race and social injustice, very much on the agenda, and that is continuing to develop a real head of steam. And so in a way that links to our first point, which was around kind of gender pay reporting. So in the UK, we've been talking about ethnicity pay reporting for quite some time, and people have been aware of the complexity and what have you around that. And once again, it's only a matter of time when that tool that we've piloted in on kind of gender balance and representation is going to be coming across to ethnicity, but people's awareness of the complexity around, as I say, race and ethnicity and opportunity and access progression in work, that is going to shape quite a lot of that ethnicity pay reporting. So that's been a very sharp focus. Secondary focus has also been mental health and well-being, and there's been a huge amount of work around that. And that's obviously a part of an inclusion and the disability spectrum. That's where most organisations would jump off. And again, we've had a huge mass pilot of how people are interacting with each other, and the world. So those are the two areas, Black Lives Matter and mental health, have been really sharp focus points within recent weeks, and I think will continue to be as we look towards the end of this year.
Thank you. And yeah, I think let's continue to watch this progress and see what happens as the year continues. So I'd just like to say thank you to Scott and Yvonne. Great to speak to you today, as always. I believe the D&I Hayes report will be released later this month.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, so everyone please look out for this. Again, we'll have more hints and tips in there for you. Thank you to those for tuning into the podcast today. We hope you found it valuable, and good luck with your D&I journeys. You can access the latest podcast videos via cips.org/knowledge, and you can download the CIPS Hayes Salary Guide for more insights at cips.org/salary guide. So I'd just like to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.